So hello to Project Wood YouTube family. Today's video is one of the videos in our special technique series where we're going to look at sanding to a very fine finish, getting our wood to be almost glass-like even without putting on a varnish or a wax or any other type of finish. If you're new to the channel, I'd be delighted if you would hit the like and subscribe button and the notification button, and that helps YouTube send out the word via its algorithm to other people who are interested in woodwork. And below you'll also see a playlist for the 3 projects we have done already on Project Wood, namely the birdhouse, the jewellery box and the phone holder. So this is the first in a series of small videos on special techniques, and we're going to be looking at sanding. So sanding wood, it can be as simple as buying an electric orbital sander or a Black & Decker mouse sander, something like that, and simply just electrically sanding your wood down to a nice finish. The thing with orbital sanders is, if you're looking to make high quality woodwork projects, orbital sanders tend to leave circular scratch marks, and other sanders tend to leave long streak marks on the wood. So you have to end up hand sanding it probably anyway if you want a very high quality finish. So most pieces of wood, there are 3 surfaces which you can look at in terms of sanding. So we look at all 3 of those here today. So we've got just surface sanding, which if it is a large surface, you probably are better giving it sanding with an electric sander or a belt sander and then finishing it by hand. There's edge sanding as well, best done by hand. And probably the most difficult of the 3 is our end grain sanding. So on the end grain you've got all the rings of the tree. This is a nice piece of heartwood. You can see the original pit of the tree in here and all the rings. This piece of timber then is at least about 20-25 years old. If you're going by those rings, it's probably older. So we want to sand all 3 surfaces, and we kind of attack all 3 surfaces in a different way. So where possible, hold your wood in a woodwork vise. I have lovely smooth jaws on this vise. If your woodwork vise is wooden jawed, make sure there's no nails in it or screws sticking out, because they will actually just mark the wood. So what do we need? Some of the ingredients we have here you will be well familiar with. Sandpaper. So we have a few different types of sandpaper here. So we have 3 glass papers and an emery paper. The first one is glass paper, with number 40 on the back. So that basically is a grade 40 sandpaper. Now the best way to think about sandpaper is the lower the number, the rougher it is. So 40 basically means per square inch of material on the sandpaper, you can have up to 40 large grains of glass or sand. Glass in this case here. On sandpaper you have 40 large stones. We then go to semi-rough sandpaper. This will have 80 written on the back. So this will have 80 pieces of glass or stone per square inch. So that obviously means they have to be smaller, and that's where you get a smoother finish. So most woods that you buy in the shop will come even a little bit smoother than 80. So if you have pencil lines or any sort of dents or scratches on the wood, you'll probably be starting off with 80. So we'll be starting with that today. We're getting smoother then. We have a P120, often you see P here. That's just for the grade of sandpaper. So this will have 120 pieces of glass or sand per square inch glued onto the backing paper. So that will give you a very smooth finish, especially if you let it get worn out a little bit. And finally then, your finishing sandpaper, it's normally black, or you can get it in grey. This is a P400. So basically, it's a sandpaper for metal, really, but we use it on wood. And you can also buy this in grades up to 800, even 1200, depending on how smooth you want to go. But 400 in general is good enough for woodwork, because we're going to be applying varnish on top. In the varnish videos coming up in a while, we will also talk about sanding varnish, because you want to sand that as well in between coats. Okay, other things we have here are sanding blocks. So most woodworkers will use scrap bits of timber in various sizes. Like that size is perfect for the edge of the wood, or this one for the surface. But sometimes, you know, they can rock on the surface of the wood and round off the corners, which we don't want. So you also have the alternative of using these sanding pads. These are readily available in any hardware shop. Again, most woodworkers will wrap their sandpaper around the sanding block or the sanding pad. But you can also just use the sanding pads themselves as sandpaper. More often than not, they will have a grade written on the end. So this says 80-120, so it's somewhere between 80 and 120. So that's a little bit inaccurate of information if you want to be a quality woodworker, but it's good for everyday sanding at home and house. We have another one here. This is 100. It feels a lot smoother. So I'd say that's probably more towards the 80 than the 100. So you can use those to sand your wood, but ideally you wrap sandpaper around them, and because they're kind of soft, they won't dent your wood or anything like that. Now, another thing we have for sanding is a paintbrush. Now you might ask, what has a paintbrush got to do with sanding? So we'll leave that till the end, and we'll show you how this water and this brush can really give you an absolutely mirror-like finish on your wood. So we're going to start off, actually our wood here is quite smooth. This is called PAO wood. Most of the wood you buy in the wood shop is PAO, planed all over. So it's quite smooth already. If you feel the smoothness with your hand and just compare it to your sandpapers, you get a rough idea about which one is the right one to start with. So I think for this one, you'll start with the 120, because the wood is quite smooth already. So we want to wrap that around our sanding block here. We'll just cut that to the same width. We never throw away sandpaper. Little bits of sandpaper come in useful at various different stages around the workshop. Even a 120 sandpaper, if you use it, it gets smoother. So in fact, it can be used for very fine sanding later on. So we wrap that carefully around the sand block. Yeah, we can cut off a little bit of excess here. Again, not to throw this away, this could come in very handy for sanding fine little details on projects later on. So try and save all our paper. Okay, so that's nice and neat. Make sure that the sandpaper fits snugly in around the sanding block. So really with sanding, we're talking about the grain of the wood a lot. So if you look at the wood here, you've got rings of the tree at the end, which we'll talk about sanding later on. And then on the face, you see most of the rings will form lines, which in general go with the direction of the grain of the wood. And you'll find the same direction on the side of the wood. So if you want, sometimes you can see flames on the side of the wood, depending on how it was cut up in the sawmill. And they can tell you which direction the tree was actually growing. So in general, the flames point up. So that tree actually grew in that direction. Okay, so we want to sand the edge here. We're going to sand with the grain. This is most important with sanding. So sanding with the grain means up and down in the direction of the lines, never 90 degrees to the lines on the wood. It just scratches the surface and you get a bad finish. So along the direction of the grain on the wood. If you wish, you can tilt the paper at 45 degrees as you're sanding, and this will allow sawdust to fall off, and also it gives a better finish. So keep your wood in a vise and nice and gently back and forward. You may want to wear a dust mask if you're in an enclosed space and you don't want to ingest a lot of dust. Okay, so this has no pencil lines on it, so maybe 10 to 20 sweeps. Okay, so that looks really clear there. Now this is the first use of our paintbrush, and we just use that to dust off the sawdust that came off there. So it's pretty smooth. So that would be your edge sanding. For the surface, again we have the grain of the wood going in the same direction as the lines on the wood. So we want to sand along that direction. Especially on a surface, you don't want to go at 90 degrees because it really does scratch. So again, nice and gently. Again, we'll brush that off. Okay, so that's two lovely smooth surfaces already, nice and clean, no pencil marks, no fingerprints. You can almost see the shine off the wood in the right light. So then we come to the end grain of the wood. So the end grain is slightly different. We've got circles obviously for the rings of the tree. So you want to put that in your vise. And in a circular motion, you keep sanding until the surface is smooth and you notice that there are no marks from the saw blade, etc. Now, what's really happening here is the fibres and the vessels and the cells in the wood, they're facing upwards like my fingers here. And you're really sanding the ends of the cells, like sanding the end of your fingertips. So that's going to be a lot tougher to do than the side. So it may take twice as long, but you're looking to get rid of all scratch marks and saw marks, etc. You should be left with a perfect image of the rings of the tree. On the end grain, it's especially where these soft sanding blocks come into their own, because you don't rock over the edge and kind of round them off. It keeps them nice and square. With a wooden sanding block, the tendency is to kind of roll over and you actually end up rounding off the edges. Okay, so that's nice and clear. So all our major saw scratch marks are gone off here, and we have a lovely view of the rings of the tree. This is a great opportunity to count them. Counting the rings gives you the age of the tree, of course. So the dark pit in the centre, just going to zoom in here on the camera above. The dark piece of wood in the middle is the original sapling of the tree, and then every ring out is 1 year's growth. And the wider the ring, the more sun and rain and good growing conditions in that summer. The dark rings are the winter. So this tree is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old there. 12, 13, 14, 15, 20 to here. So 29, almost 30 years old, even for this small piece of timber. So quite a slow grower. Okay, so just dust off all those sides. You can clearly see how rough the end grain was here originally, and compared to the smoothness now of the new sanded end. Okay, so we're going to progress then onto a finer sandpaper. Again, don't throw away this piece of 120 sandpaper. We can use that again for finer work later on. So now we're going to go up to really fine sandpaper, or 400. Again, we'll cut that to size. This is always the exciting bit about sanding, because we're getting to the really smooth finishes now. And as you'll see in a few minutes, we can make it even smoother by using another special technique. So we wrap that paper around, sometimes known as emery paper or wet and dry paper. It's originally designed actually for sanding body filler on cars for auto repair shops. But woodworkers, of course, are very resourceful and found out that it was brilliant for giving a smooth finish on the wood. Now, again, we're going to go with the grain and around circular on the end grain here. If you're using up to 1200 sandpaper here, it's so fine you actually can go across the grain. But at 400, we still need to be mindful of going with the direction of the lines and the grain on the wood. So you're going to get a very fine sawdust off this. A mask might be advisable. Okay, so it's on 10 there on that side. And already you can see a beautiful shine off it. If you rub your fingers on it, you'll see there's a very fine powder on it as well, which is always a good sign that the sandpaper is working correctly. Okay, top surface then again. So any woodwork project you make, you would do this to all the surfaces, especially the visible ones. So what's also happening here is the cells in the wood are getting closed off. It's like cutting across the top of a bunch of straws. So these cells are all getting closed off. And along with the varnish, that will prevent any insects and fungus from actually attacking and getting into the wood. So for the end grain, we go around in circular fashion again. So the longer you do it, especially with the fine sandpaper, the better the finish. Okay, so that's our three surfaces, nicely sanded up. Got a little bit of blackening here on the end grain. We'll get that off later on. Now, the brush and the water. So basically what we have done when we sand wood, we haven't made the wood smooth as such. What we've done is, as I just said, is sand off all the ends of the vessels and the cells in the wood. And even on the sides here, we've also sanded smooth a lot of wood vessels and fibres and all sorts of cellular structures. So if this wood was to get a little bit damp, or for instance when you put a varnish on it or wax which are damp, a lot of those cells will just pop straight back up. So it's a bit like cutting grass in the morning, and then as it grows in the day it pops back up. So we're going to encourage them to pop back up so that we can sand them off again. And to do that, we get a brush and some water. We don't want it too damp. We're actually going to wet. We're going to wet It's almost like it was varnish. We're going to wet the surfaces that we just sanded. To the front and our shiny side here. Nice and damp. Now what this does is it raises the grain on the wood. So the wood is going to allow the grain to pop back up. You can really see the difference in colour on the end grain here. And as that dries, the grain in the wood will lift, and then we sand it again to cut off the tops of those fibres and grain. So it only takes a few seconds for it to dry. Okay, so already you can feel that the fibres are lifting up. And as soon as that dries now, we will give it another sanding. Okay, so you can also use a hairdryer on it if you want to speed it up. This is drying very quickly here. So what's happening now is all the grain is popping back up on the surface, and on the end, and on the side. And we're going to come in then with our sandpapers again. We'll start with the 120. So I think we start on the side here, that's ready. You can leave it a bit longer, it's probably better. So you can feel it now, it's a lot rougher than when I left it before. So just sand that again. So we really are polishing off those wood grains and fibres and cells and what have you in there. It's super smooth. Nice and clean. Do our end grain next. Again, we'll go around in a circular fashion. So you can see it's a little bit damp here still in the middle, so probably give it a bit longer. And our surface here is just about dry. Now repeat with your 400 sandpaper. So we're going to go nice and fast, and you can see shine coming off the wood already. That's even without a varnish or a wax or any other finish applied. Okay, so that's the basic sanding process. So start with a sandpaper that matches the roughness of the timber. Use slightly rougher sandpaper if the wood is not planed already. Work your way up from 120s to 200s, 400s, whatever you can get in your hardware shop, even right up to 1200. Don't forget to wet the surfaces with just a normal paintbrush and some water. Allow it to dry thoroughly and a lot longer than what I've done in the video here. And then re-sand again, starting off with your 120 up to your 400 and higher sandpapers. Just remember to always sand with the grain again, and on the end grain, circular strokes. Now that will leave you with wood that's completely ready then for varnishing or waxing, and we'll have other specialist videos on those processes. But for now, give that a go. You're going to have wood sanded to a standard that you never might thought possible. If you repeat that process 3-4 times, you'll have a shine on your wood that's almost like glass, and that's a perfect surface then, particularly for wax finishes. And thank you for watching. Make sure you like and subscribe to the channel, it would help us greatly to spread the word of Project Wood. Kits for the individual videos are available on the eBay store, and that's in all the links for the individual projects in the playlists. We also have a Facebook page where we answer any questions you might have about woodwork in general. And also on Instagram we go live with a lot of these videos, so you get to see them first before we even publish them out on YouTube. Thank you very much for watching, and happy sanding.